Hello, friends. Welcome back to day number 6 of the Ugly Art Club's 5-minute challenge. The prompt for today is hotel carpet. Now, if you watched my intro video to this series, you know that I said that I wasn't as inspired by some of the prompts as I was before, but I wasn't going to think too hard about it when it started because that's super easy then to convince yourself not to participate if you feel like you aren't resonating with some of them. But I love being able to take it then day by day, prompt by prompt, however you're participating, because it allows you to really think about each one individually. So my main method when I think about the prompts is, what is the first thing that kind of comes to your head? And I worked in hotels for several years, and I know that hotel carpets are not always pretty. They can be ugly. And the next thing I thought of is a repetitive pattern. And another one is the colors that they use. They try to do it so that it hides the dirt. You know, of course they're in there cleaning, but they want something they're not going to put a white carpet in a hotel. So I think you guys know what I'm saying. So my idea generator is just to kind of go with the first thing that comes to mind and see if I can come up with some idea that comes from that. So it does not need to be super literal. Now, if somebody looked at this one without the prompt word associated with it at the end, would they say to themselves hotel carpet? No, they wouldn't. But I'm okay with that because in the end, when I look at it, I can see it and I can see where that inspiration came from. And it's also really fun to look back and be like, oh yeah, that was a weird idea. I went with it. Whatever works. So I took a couple colors here that I thought would blend fun together. I have nickel azo yellow, I have raw umber, and Titan buff. I think those are all heavy bodies from Golden. All of the supplies that I use, I tried to link them down in the description below, so make sure you're checking that out if you're curious about different colors or materials that I'm using. I then used a sponge that I use for stenciling. It's like a makeup sponge. It's a nice dense sponge, and just kind of blended those colors together on the paper themselves. I didn't do much blending ahead of time. I just wanted each color to kind of seep and blend with one another and give it kind of that painterly style. I also added in some black Stabilo at the beginning just to give it a little bit of grunge, and then added some fabric on like I would any collage, but I thought it would be fun to do the fabric just because the carpet, it reminds me of like textiles. And so I wanted to add a little bit of texture onto the page as well. All right, so now we're getting into where I was thinking about that repetitive pattern. I have this stencil, and unfortunately, I don't know where it's from. It's an old quilting stencil that I had, and I thought it would be perfect for kind of that repetitive feel across the whole thing. A lot of times, the carpet patterns are a little bit more generic. I don't know. So that's where my head was going with this prompt, and I think it's for a prompt that I was not originally inspired by. I actually really love how this one turned out. It may help that I love the colors that I chose. Yes, I said more ugly colors at the beginning, but I love these colors together. You give me mustard and you give me those chartreuse tones and those earthy tones. I'm gonna love it. So I have my little prompt tab here now, and I'm gonna use the black and white one that I printed out, but it feels a little bit too harsh. It feels more along the gray tones rather than the brown tones. And so I want to grunge it up just a little bit. I put Stabilo all markings around the outside, and then with a damp paintbrush kind of painted that on. And then it still was a little bit too gray tones for me. So then I decided to add a little bit with my already wet paintbrush that had the Stabilo pigment in it. I didn't even wash it off. I used the cream color and the yellow color and just added a little bit more oomph onto that little prompt tab there. I still am doing really good on time this time. As you can see, I have about 30 seconds left, and so I'm deciding what all I'm going to add. I was considering on that prompt tab if I just staple it on, but since I have a little bit of time left, I'm going to actually stitch it on. I love the idea of stitching with this one because, as I said, with the carpet, the texture, I just wanted to add more if I possibly could. I like to have a couple needles pre-threaded ahead of time, especially when I'm doing this challenge. It allows me to add in that slow stitching, that hand stitching, without having to stop and feel that pressure to thread a needle really quick. I swear, anytime on camera I try to thread a needle, it looks like it's the first time I've ever done it. So if I can thread that ahead of time, it's one thing that's just a tiny bit easier for me as I'm working. And that can be a good tip and trick too, even when you're not doing a challenge like this where you're timing yourself, but in your regular art practice as well. Why not have a couple of those supplies already on hand that it's easy to tell yourself not to go through the effort of doing it, but hey, if the needle is already threaded or if the supply is already there, it's a lot easier to actually use that in your artwork. So I definitely recommend doing that if you have a few maybe neutral colors you want to keep threaded, or a fun pop of color, whatever works for you. Or if you don't want to keep it threaded, keep a little bit of that embroidery floss nearby, or I believe this is a sashiko thread. Keep it nearby with your other art stuff, and even if it's just a few colors that you have there, I think it creates such a fun dimension and texture into whatever you're doing. So I tied a little wonky knot there, and adding a few last little scribble marks to the page as well. And next up, I'm going to create a little complimentary spread to go with this. I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I have some of this paint already left over, and so I'm just going to use that and see where it takes me for this second spread. I love the way that the colors are actually blending within the sponge itself. So each individual sponge mark looks different than the ones around it, which is such a fun variety. And I think it pairs really well with the original spread and how I kind of sponged to make those colors blend and be cohesive with each other. This is also a good lesson for me, I think, in both sides of the spread. If I'm working like inside of a journal, they don't both have to be have a lot going on. Having one simpler like this really lets your brain focus on the one that has a lot more going on. I hope that you guys enjoyed today, and I'll see you tomorrow for day number 7.